Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. I hope you are excited for a great show today because I have with me Valerie Beltran. And in this conversation today, I just want to say that I am honored to share space with the remarkable Valerie, a healer, a therapist, and compassionate guide who has redefined what it means to hold space for others. Valerie's journey into the world of therapy feels almost preordained, driven by her lifelong fascination with people and their stories. Her superpower, being super at being human. Known for her unique ability to create a safe, judgment free environment, Valerie is the confidant for life's most vulnerable moments, the person you can trust with your deepest truths. Her presence is both grounding and empowering, offering a balance of strength and surrender, gentleness and directness. In her sessions, you'll find not just a therapist, but a collaborator, a cheerleader for your inner healing, and at times a friend who knows the power of simply listening. Valerie's approach is a masterful blend of Western psychology, Eastern and indigenous traditions, and cutting edge research on the mind body connection. She sees humanity through a lens of neurodiversity, rejecting the outdated notions of normal and instead celebrating the vast and creative potential of human differences. Her work is compassionate, collaborative, and deeply informed by both science and spirit. Today, we'll dive into Valerie's world, exploring her journey, her wisdom, and her commitment to helping others uncover their most authentic selves. Let's welcome Valerie Beltran to the conversation. Valerie, how are you today?
Good, thanks. That was an incredible take on my bio. I love that. Did you write that? Did GPT write that? That was impressive.
Yep. Yeah, a little bit of both. If people want to know the secret, I think always you should definitely investigate and do research on the people you're talking to. And if you can find like 3 or 4 different bios that they have put up somewhere on different places, then you can take those three and with some help of AI, just kind of combine them and kind of cajole it to, hey, here's the person I'm talking to. Here's the conversation I want. Can you please look at these bios and let's try to make this thing work together. And it takes a few prompts or whatever, but it comes out beautiful. And I hope that I did well in presenting it because that's what I want the podcast to be. And those are the people I want to talk to. So it works out well.
You really did. You knocked it out of the park. I mean, even some of those things, I'm like, that's not even on print anywhere on a website. I'm like, that is something obscure that I said in some little talk that I did a long time ago. How did he find that? That's impressive.
Yeah, I think the future is beautiful. I think that, when we can start finding or paying attention to the details that someone might have said a while back and incorporating that into the bigger picture, I think we're starting to expand our sense of awareness on some level.
Mm, absolutely. I feel like I just a couple nights ago I was at this little social gathering for some people in the psychedelic space, and I ran into somebody that I hadn't seen in like a year and a half, and he and I connected at the psychedelic science conference, and we were both at a little after party during one of the conference nights, and there was a musician who was going to be playing later, and I remember watching this guy, and he was watching the sound check for the musician, and the way he was just completely absorbed and like listening to this musician, I could see that the music was impacting him in such an intense, beautiful way. And I could see like this guy's experience and see his heart and see his like emotion just by watching him watch this musician's sound check, not even his performance. And so I went up to the guy and I was like, are you available for a conversation right now? And he's like, yeah, I love how you asked me that. And he was like, great, let's talk. And he says that I interviewed him because I have this natural curiosity for people, and I just got to know him, and I was able to see his essence. And he was like, you captured such a beautiful moment and an energy that you saw in me that I really wanted to talk through, and you were able to ask me the right questions to allow that essence to unfold.
It's a beautiful story. And I do think it speaks volumes of the elevated awareness or the evolution of awareness that seems to be happening, especially in the psychedelic space. And there's so many events, like there's so much, sometimes trauma, but sometimes other things that happen in these altered states that bond people together forever. And as I say that, I got a friend of mine coming in from Hawaii right here. Reg 420, I love you, brother. I hope you're doing amazing out there. This is my friend from Hawaii, Valerie.
Mm.
This guy right here, this guy had a heart attack man. And I don't know if he wants me to tell this story. I probably should be careful. Anyways, there's a really good chance that this guy's heart attack was saved because he had a huge dose of he attributes, and the paramedics attribute his ability to rebound back from a large amount of psilocybin a few days before. And like, I know that that's kind of there's not a whole lot of science behind that, but there is a lot of science behind neuroplasticity and learning to talk again and learning to walk again. And this guy swears cardiac arrest. Sorry, Reg. Cardiac arrest. It's fascinating. And I just wanted to bring that up because he's over here and I love this guy. But Valerie, what you work at the Zendo Project, maybe you could tell people a little bit about that and we can kind of get into some different stories and talk about just psychedelics and life and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, first and foremost, I'm a therapist. I have a private practice, and I specialize in trauma. And I do a process called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. That's a trauma technique that I often work with. So that's the bulk of the work that I do. I have my private practice. And then I also work with psychedelics. I supervise at a clinic that's a psychedelic assisted therapy clinic. Right now we're serving ketamine. And we work with marginalized community members in Oakland, California. It's a low-fee sliding scale clinic. So we're able to provide accessible, affordable ketamine-assisted psychedelic therapy. And outside of doing that, I work with Zendo Project, and I am the outreach director. I'm also a supervisor when we provide services at festivals. And so what Zendo Project does is we provide psychedelic care and emotional support at festivals. So if somebody is experiencing a difficult experience, whether they've taken a lot of psychedelics or just feeling overstimulated in a festival or event space, or if they've experienced some kind of trauma, like maybe they've had an assault, abuse, something stolen from them, grief, a breakup, whatever they're experiencing, they can come to one of our tents. And like at Burning Man, we have 2 spaces where on both sides of the playa, people can come from anywhere. We're staffed 24/7, and we have amazing volunteers who take time out of their own festival experience to sit and share the experiences of these guests who come in and are just seeking solace, wanting some care, wanting a compassionate individual just to listen to them. We provide a safe, quiet space for people to recover.
I'm so stoked to get to hear about that. And I'm so stoked that you and other people choose to help out people that need help, whether it's in your practice or at Zendo. It sounds to me like you have a profound curiosity with behavior. Where did that come from? I mean, I know that, you grew up in a Mexican-American sort of one foot in both worlds, but where did your profound curiosity from behavior come from?
Yeah, it really feels innate. I remember my grandmother, I was very close with her when I was young. She used to take me out for lunch every so often, and I would just ask her a million questions. And she used to say the one word she would use to describe me was inquisitive. And she was the one who taught me that word. And I always held on to that. I was like, that's a cool word. And it feels cool for her to label me in that way. And so I carried this description of inquisitive for so long as this like badge of honor. And to me, it really feels like a way of caring for people to show such genuine curiosity of, I just want to know you. I want to know your story. I want to feel your essence. I want to see your soul. I want to know like all the juicy details. To me, I think that's one of the best things we can offer to people. And it's just fascinating. I love learning people's stories. I love hearing their innermost thoughts and feelings. Like to me, what more is there in life?
Yeah. It's so interesting too. It seems to me that, altered states of awareness or altered states of consciousness find a way for us to see ourselves and our relationships in a way that is almost foreign to us. You can find this thing that felt so guilty about, but you can kind of sneak up on it in an altered state of awareness and put your arm around it and be like, hey, what's going on over here? And it's so interesting to think about the ways in which we can change the way we feel about ourselves and relationships in altered states of awareness. And, you see that a lot in your practice and in the Zendo. What's your take on how the relationship between ourselves, our vision of ourselves, and altered states of awareness?
I think the term altered states is an interesting term, and it really kind of implies this state of like a normal state, and then anything outside
Right.
of it is altered, right? Yeah, and it's like,
Right.
let's start with that baseline of like, is that a true statement? Is that something we want to operate from? And for me, I think there are so many different states of consciousness, different states of being.
Yeah.
And I don't really agree that there's like a typical or a norm, and then we just kind of take a substance or experience something that shifts us out of it temporarily. I think it's way more a spectrum and shades of gray where we might come in and out of lots of different states of consciousness and feel kind of altered for many reasons throughout any given day, like sans substance. So I think being able to have that lens first and foremost can give us a sense of there's not any particular like norm that I should be striving for or that is like what's acceptable. And then outside of that, it gives us this opportunity to just kind of play with different states of consciousness and have a curiosity without any judgment of this is not the norm, so maybe I shouldn't take this as seriously, or I'm not in my like correct state of mind, so any thought or dream or goal that I come up with in this altered state, I shouldn't take that as seriously because it's not my like baseline state of consciousness. I feel like it can allow us this freedom to appreciate thoughts or experiences that could come out in any state of consciousness, whether it's altered or not.
Yeah, it's a great point. The semantics on some level can fundamentally change the way you see the world or yourself on some level. And it's true. Like, aren't we just shifting through different states constantly? Like a moment ago, I was a little hungry, and then now I'm whatever. Well, you're always shifting through these different states. To say there's something like normal,
Yeah,
it's pretty
exactly.
bad. Good.
Yeah, I feel like even with a lot of my clients in my private practice work, I will often work on people, of course, I think recognize the importance of having like a meditation practice or a dedicated practice where you can sit for or even engage in like yoga or some kind of active meditation practice. It doesn't have to be a sitting practice. I think people recognize the importance of having something devoted for like half an hour if possible. But most people don't have that kind of time. And so I work a lot with people on just creating little mindful moments. Someone the other day said that this is like microdosing mindfulness.
Yeah.
Right? And I love this idea
Yeah.
of like, okay, let's at least just microdose mindfulness. Like there's a whole fervor about microdosing psilocybin right now or microdosing other psychedelics. How about let's microdose mindfulness? Like let's just take these little moments where if you are chopping vegetables, getting dressed, getting into the shower, driving, doing all these things that are very rote that you usually just go into autopilot and your mind starts to wander. Let's prioritize those moments as times when you can take a breath, bring your attention into your body, notice what you're feeling, ask yourself, what's alive for me right now? What am I feeling? Is there an emotion that's underneath the surface that wants to be tuned into? Is there a voice that I could listen to right now that's whispering something that if I turn my attention towards it, I can hear that, and it's actually something that can really give me a lot of value or insight or just give it the experience of being heard. So taking these moments of mindfulness, I feel it's a really good tool to look at these different states of consciousness throughout the day and become more aware of maybe right now I'm in a little bit more of a daydreamy kind of state. And with that comes like an appreciation of things in a slower way. Like maybe I'm looking at the leaves that are blowing outside the window. Maybe I'm noticing a cat in the corner who's soaking up the sunlight. Maybe I appreciate the warmth of the sunlight coming through. And that's my state of consciousness right now. And then maybe I'll shift into a state of consciousness where I'm in deep focus mode and I am not aware of anything around me because I am sucked into my computer. I'm in flow state. I'm writing something that feels really powerful and I am just completely tuned in. And that's a different state of consciousness. And then maybe there's a whole other one where I'm just completely connected and immersed in a conversation that I'm having with someone, and I feel much more in my heart and in my emotions and my body. So I think looking at all these different like altered states as they're just variations of states of consciousness, and different parts of ourselves can come alive during different states of consciousness, and we can attune to them and find value in them instead of assigning one like a normal state or a baseline.
Yeah, it seems so like to just define something as one, it seems like so narrow and short-sighted on some level. I, I'm so curious about relationships, and it seems to me that you work a lot in relationships and all the things that you're doing. And I'm curious to get your opinion on, do you think the relationship you have with yourself is the same relationship you have with the people around you?
Mm, yeah, many layered question. I feel we can take that in so many directions of like that. Yeah, I think our relationship with ourselves, of course, forms the foundation for the relationship we can have with anybody else. And the relationship with self also kind of, for me at least, implies lots of different selves. As again, there's
Yeah.
not just one self, right? There are many different aspects of ourselves. We could look at like an internal family systems, like a parts work, where we can see all these different parts of ourselves. And borrowing from internal family systems, for anyone not familiar, there these different categories of parts of ourselves where it's like maybe there are these firefighters who come online if there's some kind of threat and they're going to jump onto the scene and protect us. And maybe there are these managers who are just kind of managing our normal baseline experience and keeping any threats from coming up. And then there are these exiles that are the truly vulnerable parts that are usually the ones being protected and less able to reveal themselves. So we could look at these different categories of parts of ourselves and see some of those relationships. And then there's also like a deeper, more spiritual sense. Like I incorporate a lot of spirituality into a lot of my practices, not necessarily in a dogmatic way and not even necessarily naming spiritual practices or principles, but I will come from a more deeply like spiritually aligned place in myself. And part of that comes with recognizing that I think there's kind of this true self and a false self, which could also be different ways of describing like the ego and the
Mm.
soul, or like a higher self and your kind of day-to-day self, or it's like a voice of anxiety versus a voice of groundedness, or like a centered foundation of being. And so with like the true self, I think that's more your soul perspective. That's like you and your highest self. That's you when you're speaking from this place of deep truth. I often refer to it as like the chest voice. So when you hear that
Mm.
voice, it feels like it's coming from a deeper place and it resonates more from this chest place versus the false self that is like the ego. It's kind of this head voice. And to me, when I hear something coming from my head voice, it almost sounds more tinny. It's like a whiny, like anxious, kind of frenetic energy that feels very different than when it's something coming from my chest. And like an example of that is like if I'm asking myself, well, do I want to take this job offer? Like I'm wondering about that question in myself, right? I have all these different voices coming at me and telling me different things. Then maybe there might be one voice that's the head voice that's kind of saying like, don't take that job. Like, what about the job that you have right now? You can't let go of security. You don't know what that job is going to look like. Yeah, there could be some benefits. There could be a lot of great opportunities, but also what if they're not? What if it turns out to be like something scary or something bad? Like it feels like this almost kind of like frenetic, tinny kind of voice versus like this deeper chest place that is usually a much wider perspective, a much more grounded, like you'll feel into if it feels like the right job. And maybe there's no such thing as the right job anyway. Maybe there are just different options to take and different paths to walk. And when I hear that voice, I feel this settling into myself of, Okay. Yeah, that resonates more from this deeper place. So, to answer your question, this very long, convoluted way, I think if we have these different relationships with ourselves, then we can have more clarity, more connectedness to ourselves, and more authenticity that we can bring into relationship with other people.
I don't think it's convoluted at all. In fact, I think after hearing that particular answer, I understand why you are the director of outreach, and I understand why you're successful in your practice. Like when you start, like I could see the tinny character. Oh yeah, I know that guy inside me. Yeah, don't listen to that guy. That guy like whining
Right?
about stuff. Take it easy, you know. It's so funny. It's well done. You know,
Right.
it's there's something that happens, and I'm curious to hear what you have to think. I've I think we all know people, and we probably both have had incredible experiences where you go deep on a trip. Like you're like, I'm gonna take this 14 grams, and boom, all of a sudden you find yourself like, I'm pretty sure I think I'm Jesus. Pretty
Yeah.
sure I should be calling my mom right now at 3 in the morning. Or I should call my sister. Yeah, but then you can't talk, you can't see anything. Sometimes in these really deep trips, you find yourself in uncharted territory. And that is like being next to a wild animal, right? You're like, whoa, what's gonna happen here? I'm sure that you have seen that, probably maybe even experienced it from time to time. What sort of advice do you have for people that maybe maybe they are veterans or maybe they're new, but they find themselves in really deep water, uncharted territory? I'm sure you see that quite often.
Absolutely. I mean, this is often something that will come up when we see guests come into our Zendos when we're providing services at festivals or at events. We'll have people come in who are experiencing really hellish terrain, really scary
Yeah.
parts of themselves come up, feel like there are these things that they're actually seeing. They've kind of lost sight of reality, lost sight of even who they are. I've seen that even in my private practice, sometimes it'll come up. I've experienced that myself. I've experienced an ego death where I completely had no sense of who I was. I could not remember my name or any autobiographical detail of myself whatsoever. And in those moments, maybe I'll speak from my ego death experience because I think it's good to stay in the subjective space of what I actually experienced. And I like to talk about my own difficult experiences as a therapist because I think it
Yeah.
builds a lot of confidence for people to know that I've also been in these places and I know that I have one come out of them and that I can better walk with somebody who's going through a difficult experience if I've walked that terrain myself.
Yep.
And so, speaking from my experience, luckily, when I had my ego death, it was well into my understanding of psychedelics, well into my therapy practice. It only came about a year and a half ago. So this was a recent experience. It was very deep in my understanding of spiritual practices. I had a great relationship with ego death. Like I'd done a lot of inner work on myself. So I came in much more resourced and prepared than probably many people are when they have these experiences. And because of that, I kind of anticipated that that could happen. I knew I was taking a rather high dose or a high dose for my body weight and my sensitivity. I took 80 milligrams intramuscularly, ketamine in a clinic. And I kind of anticipated that I might have an ego death experience. And fortunately, I had coached myself and was very prepared. I was with, it was at a clinic that I was working at. And so I knew my coworkers, I knew the doctor who had injected the ketamine into me, I knew the nurse with whom I was sitting. I knew everybody. I felt very comfortable and safe. And so I had coached myself going into it anticipating that this might happen, that I might have this experience of being completely dethroned and not knowing
Mhm.
who or what or where I was. And when it happened, I had just a slight awareness of, I remember thinking this could happen, or some distant part of me. I don't know who
Yeah.
that person was or what her name was, but some distant part of me anticipated something like this happening. And now it's happening. And I remember this. There's a little part of me that is like, this is what we trained for. We're ready. Let's do this. And I was like, okay, I'm in it. Here we go. I remember that I need to breathe. And I thought, okay, breathe. Like I often tell people, breath is the most simple and most important, most profound tool that we have. That breath is the one bodily function that we can either completely control or have absolutely no control of, and it will function completely without our conscious control of it. And that there's something magical just
Yeah.
itself right there, that we can have total control over it, and also it can completely function on its own. It's magical. And so breath is this very simple tool that has such a profound effect. And returning to the breath is so important to regulate our nervous system, to give us space to be able to take a pause. Like between stimulus and response, there's a pause, there's an opportunity to make a choice. And in that choice lies freedom. It's a Viktor Frankl quote. It's a perturbation of a Viktor Frankl quote. And when you have that breath, when you're able to take that pause, it's the opportunity and the freedom to choose, what do I want to do with this? Like, here's a situation that's being presented to me. Maybe it's a terrifying thing that I'm seeing. Maybe it's just a complete uncertainty, lack of awareness, total ego death, dissolution, where I don't even know who I am. Whatever it is that's happening, when you take a breath, it's this opportunity to take a step back and say, all right, I can't control life and the circumstances in which I currently find myself, but I can control how I want to react to it and what I do with it. So let me take a breath. Let me feel into my body and let me decide what I want to do with this. And so for me, when I had that experience, I breathed very heavily and I thought, okay, I remember there's this idea of surrender. I need to surrender in some kind of way. And I was able to just relax a little bit. And the words surrender, trust, let go, those can be triggering for some people. And I think they're kind of difficult because they kind of imply a binary, like you either trust or you don't trust. You either let go or you're holding on to something. And I don't like anything that's a binary for many reasons, because I think it's too black or white. Also, because when you create this binary, it creates a pressure that you have to do one thing. And if you're not doing it perfectly, it means you're not doing it at all. There's a whole lot of middle ground. So in my practice, I try to erase those binaries wherever we can, because they're these false dichotomies that our brains tend to create, that we put pressure on ourselves that we are either doing something or we're not. And I try to find middle grounds, shades of gray between those things. So instead of surrendering, for me, when I was having that experience and I was breathing and I was reminding myself what to do, I thought, can I just be curious? I'm an innately curious person, right? Can I use that curiosity to just explore my experience? Like maybe I don't have to completely surrender to it, but maybe I can explore. So for me, I like the idea explore or have curiosity. Those are words that for me are more comfortable than surrender, trust, or let go. I also, instead of the word let go, I like the term let in, because it implies that I can be letting in a difficult aspect of an experience, but that doesn't mean I have to push everything else out. It doesn't mean that I'm either letting go or I'm holding on. It means I'm letting in, and I can have other parts of me in there too. I don't have to exclusively only be letting go or holding on. I can be feeling many different things at once. I can let in a scary feeling, and there can be part of me that can be feeling comfortable. I can be feeling extreme discomfort, and there can be parts of me that are finding comfort. So I like those kinds of words better, and I teach them to other people. Unfortunately, because I had this training, I was able to use those words myself. So I remembered these words, I remembered these concepts, and I was able to explore my experience and have curiosity about my experience. And that helped me stop freaking out. It stopped the from coming. And I wasn't completely freaking out, but I felt like I could. If I didn't
Mhm.
do something, I could have easily freaked out. But I was able to just explore, be curious about my experience, and it kept me from freaking out. And then the most important point that I like to tell people is I was able to relax enough to be curious about my experience. And then I had this blissful moment. And then the trauma, the terror, the fear came up again. And I was like, wait, I just did the whole curiosity thing. I just did the whole surrender thing. You're telling me I got to do it again? And turns out, yeah, it's not just a one-time thing, it's a continual process. And that became a good metaphor for life of I don't just surrender once, or I don't just trust once, or I don't just release once. It's a continual practice. Like, things will always come up that can be difficult. And this is why it's a practice.
I love it. It's such an awesome story. And it just speaks to the embodiment of the experience. Like it feels like a test. It feels like, okay, I'm going to show you life in about 4 hours, or I'm going to, however long the substance you take. Sometimes it's like, I'm going to simulate the difficult times, and you're going to sit with it because you can't go anywhere because you're under the influence. You have to sit with this thing and hold on to it. And you learn, like, once you just sit with it for a little while, you stare at it and you let it run its course, it moves away. And it's
Yeah.
such a metaphor for life, right? Because it just teaches you. And then it comes up again. Okay, you did it this time. How fast can you do it this time? Are you comfortable with it yet? Let's try it again. Let's try it again. It's like this simulation that you can do. I can't help but think of the word default mode network. And it seems that so many people were moving past this default mode network. Maybe the default mode network is a binary system. Yes, no, good, bad. We're moving past that into this way. We're changing our language. We're changing our awareness. It seems that, at least in this space, a lot of people are having these similar experiences. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. And for anyone not aware, yeah, the default mode network is the part of the brain that, for right now, our understanding of psychedelics, a lot of people understand that there is some relationship with this part of the brain. I think, first and foremost, we don't fully understand how psychedelics work. We don't fully understand how the brain works. So I'm always cautious anytime I try to wax poetic explaining any kind of function of the brain. Also, I'm not a neuroscientist, so take this with a grain of salt. But I think a lot of research right now is pointing to this particular part of the brain called the default mode network that is kind of responsible for a lot of the like autobiographical sense of self. Like, this is who I know myself to be. It's kind of like a seat of the ego, if you will, like the parts of ourselves that have developed all of these defense mechanisms, or all of these personality structures, these ways of being, and ways that we feel like we need to show up in the world in order to feel safe, or to receive love, or to feel good enough. So it's kind of our personality, if you will, but from a defended place. So it's kind of that false sense of self, like the sense of self that we have to create based on the experiences that we have early in life for how we think we need to move through the world. And what psychedelics do is they decrease a lot of the activity in this part of the brain while you're under the influence of the psychedelic. And what that does is it allows you to have freedom from all of these ego structures, these defense mechanisms, these ways of seeing, this is who I am, this is who I have to be to show up in the world. It liberates you from that for this temporary time where you're able to see maybe the true self, the deeper sense of self, maybe your soul, your higher self, whatever you want to call it. It allows you to connect to this deeper place, to that kind of chest voice. And so often when I see people on psychedelics who are in that place, they will say these incredibly powerful, liberated things like, I don't know why I try so hard when I don't have to try. Like, I am lovable as I am. I am worthy as I am. Like, I feel connected to people. I don't have to try to find love. I am enough. There's so many utterings of people feeling that profound truth. And Yeah, I think it's interesting what you're saying, bringing it back to this, like, are we moving away from like a default mode network? I think when enough people start to tap into that place of feeling I am enough, I don't have to hold on to these ego structures or this way of people pleasing or proving my self worth by being successful or whatever we do in life. I don't have to act from that place. I can let go of it. When enough people start to tap into that and can start living from that place, it really allows for an evolution of self and then evolution on the collective level. Like maybe that evolution starts trickling out to the people closest to you, the people in your system. And then maybe those start trickling out to the people in your wider community and then to more global scales. And for me, I think this is how evolution can work, where we will actually develop to different stages of consciousness, different levels of being. That I think, yeah, maybe we are seeing the shift away from the default mode network. But I'm curious to learn more about what you mean by that, how you're seeing that. So yeah, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, like, well, I was talking to Amy Reichelt yesterday, and like, I'm so fortunate to get to talk to so many cool people, like yourself included. And I was asking her about mechanism of action because she's studying like the 5-2A receptor. And there's all these cool studies out there. But I asked her, I'm like, Amy, are we ever really going to figure out mechanism of action? There's so many variables. You can't, like, there's just too many variables. We could do A squared plus B squared plus C squared, but we don't know about what D is or what E. Like, we don't thoroughly understand the algebra. So we're not going to solve mechanism of action, at least on like a serious level. This is just some truck driver talking. So this is just my thoughts on it. But I don't think we're going to figure that out anytime soon. But
Mm-hmm.
I think what we can start thinking about is that we can put some of these things together and come up with an idea. Like I was talking to Luke Jensen, who does imaging from people that do ayahuasca, and he can see the different brain waves happen. And we know about the default mode network. So we can come up with some ideas about, as above, so below. If our mind is changing inside of us, and we as individuals are moving out of sort of this default mode network where we're living this life in a routine. And most people find themselves that go through psychedelic therapy breaking the routine. They start doing something different. And when they do that, their whole relationship changes. So I feel like the default mode network is not only a way we think, but it's a way we do. It's a way we be. And when you start look at, if you factor in neuroplasticity in there, you start processing information in different parts of the brain, your whole behavior changes. What you do in life changes. Your relationship changes. The way you talk to yourself changes. So when I say default mode network, I'm saying more than the brain. I'm saying the default George. When you I don't know, when you pick out a car, it comes with default. Okay, it defaults to the 2-door. It defaults to the vanity mirror. It defaults to the 4-cylinder engine. But if you want to, there's these other options. If you're going to be conscious and make conscious choices, there are other options. And so I think that on some level, psychedelics allows us to be more conscious of the changes in our lives. But if you want to go through life using the default mode network, you can. And in fact, I think we're encouraged when you start looking at education, when you look at K-5, you go to a classroom, you sit in front of an authoritarian figure, you got to ask for permission to go to the bathroom. You have the default mode network instilled in you from K-12. But a lot of the smartest people I know were the troublemakers, and these people were figuring out ways to get out of the default mode network. And so,
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think another term for default mode network and the way you're using it is just autopilot, right? It's like
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful.
on autopilot. And
Yeah.
I think so many of us don't realize that that's our baseline,
Yep.
where we're operating, because the key word is realize. We don't
Yeah.
realize, period. We don't have the self-awareness to be able to tune in to see, where is this coming from right now? Like, is this my true authentic self that's wanting to take
Yeah.
this action? Probably not in many times. It's probably the conditioning that we've received,
Yes.
saying from school, from culture, from parents, from families, from all these different
Yep.
systems of inculcation that we receive early on that create this sense of who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to show up to be good enough or to feel love. And so, yeah, when you experience a psychedelic, all of that conditioning is stripped away. and you feel this sense of, I am good enough, period. I don't need to do anything to
Right?
prove worth. I am good enough simply because I am a human being who is alive today, period. That is why I'm good enough. I don't have to do or be anything more than anything I already am. And yeah, I think so many people, when they're able to have a glimpse of that,
Yes.
those beautiful things that you can't unglimpse it. And that
Yep.
wakes you up. It's like the Matrix moment of pulling being
Yes.
pulled out of the Matrix, and you're like, oh shit, I was living in the Matrix. I had no idea. I was in this default mode network. I was on autopilot.
Yeah.
And now I recognize there's a choice. And that gives you this choice of, do I want to go back to that? Or do I want to do some self work, learn to tune into myself, learn to question, is this coming from conditioning, or is this what I actually want to be doing from my truest self? Is this the anxious head voice that's telling me to do this? Or is this the deep chest soul voice that's telling me, this is authentic to me and this is what I want to be doing?
I love it. And that brings up this idea, Valerie. We spoke about, if enough people begin to figure this out, I think it's something along the lines of it takes 5% of people to foment a revolution. But,
Hmm.
and if we can, there's a great saying that says the best predictor of future behavior is past relevant behavior. And if I look back to the late 50s, we saw psychedelics in this medical container before it became contagious and spread out to a wider audience. I'm curious, do you think that we are amongst that right now? Like, we see this medical container that it's in, and we see some problems with clinical trials. We see some pushback from different agencies, but all the while this pushback and stuff is happening, it's spreading out to a wider audience. Maybe people that aren't clinicians. The underground seems to be thriving with certification. Are we seeing psychedelics maybe moving into the next phase, which is maybe something more like the 60s were?
Hmm. Yeah, I tend to think a lot, and like I try to keep a long-term perspective on
Right.
things, think about a lot of like systems perspectives, a lot of cycles.
Yep.
I try to understand like large perspectives and how things can move in these cycles, and understanding where we might be at in a cycle can help me have a greater sense of peace and acceptance around things. And I often use, I think this has largely been attributed to Plato coming up with the concept of like thesis, antithesis, synthesis. A lot of people also use that model. And maybe he wasn't the first to originate it, but just saying he's often credited with that. And this idea of like synthesis being the ultimate, like this is where we can take these, well, starting with thesis, right? You have this idea or this like new thing that's kind of put out there. Often there will be a rejection. There will be a swing in the opposite direction of finding out what might be wrong with it, or people rejecting it, or being able to just poke holes and have a healthy criticism, and maybe it'll overcorrect and swing too far in the opposite direction. Or maybe it's just healthy to be able to scrutinize something. But we have this antithesis where we kind of go against the thesis, right? Whatever this given idea might be. And then after time, you might poke holes in the holes that have been poked, right? And then you kind of recognize, oh, okay, well, here are ways to synthesize the holes and the criticisms that have come from that. Here are ways to make it a little bit more, to bring greater peace to it, to figure out ways to synthesize it. So then you come back around and it's this synthesis. And then ultimately, that synthesis then becomes the thesis of the next stage, where it's like, oh no, wait, there are ideas here that still need to be criticized. And so it becomes the antithesis. And up we go on this spiral, this endless cycle of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and this forever and ever, right? Turtles all the way down and all the way up. And we have that cycle. And for me, it helps to have that long-term perspective. So bringing this back to your question, with psychedelics, I think we are in a bit of that cycle where, like the 60s, in like mainstream Western society, we had this huge bust around, this boom and bust around psychedelics, where it was heavy in research. It seemed like there was a lot of potential, there's a lot of fervor. It gets adopted into mainstream, and then the antithesis comes, that it becomes associated with the counterculture, and then it becomes this illicit thing, and it gets pushed into the dark recesses of the collective unconscious. And so we push it away, and we come up with Reagan and the DARE program and all of these like anti-drug education things, right? So that's the antithesis that we've been living in for a while. And now I feel like there's this resurgence, and people are calling it the psychedelic renaissance. And we're again starting to evaluate, well, maybe some of those holes that we were poking in the psychedelic idea, psychedelic revolution, maybe those holes weren't quite so accurate, or maybe we were too hard on those things, and let's reevaluate. So now it feels like we might be in a bit of a synthesis, where we're kind of bringing back in some of the benefits that we were initially seeing in the 60s before it was all outlawed in the 70s, and starting to recognize. But I think an important thing that's shifting, at least I'm hoping to see more of this in Western society around psychedelics, is that part of that synthesis and part of the plugging of those holes is that we're incorporating a lot of the indigenous wisdom around psychedelics that have existed forever. Like indigenous cultures all over the world have used psychedelics for time immemorial. Like this is not new in any facet of the society, only in Western society where we're starting to like open up to this. And I think a lot of people in Western society, as part of the synthesis, we're starting to take some of that ancient teaching and indigenous teachings and being able to understand this more long-term perspective and build a healthier culture around it. I'm a little hopeful in seeing that being the direction for the future. And maybe I'm being a little bit too optimistic there, but I think that could be one of the ways that we are patching the holes. But the point is that I feel like now we could be in this place of synthesis where we're starting to reintegrate how psychedelics could be part of culture, and people are really opening up to it in a positive way. And all that being said, taking this truly global perspective, this is just going to be the thesis of the next stage. So there will be ultimately more holes poked into this. There will be different trials and tribulations and challenges, and it's not going to just be widely accepted and like things are just a-okay. Like there will be more challenge, and it's a necessary part of the development and the stages. And I think we are on a path towards greater acceptance and influence in the mainstream. And that's just all part of the spiral. We're just going to keep going up with this journey in psychedelics.
I love it. Bringing it all the way back to Plato. I feel like we're
you gotta
well done.
Yeah, right. I feel like there's always some kind of, in any Western interview, you got to bring it back to Plato.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we're in the allegory of the cave, right? Some people have broken out, and then you come back in, you're like, hey, it's totally different out there. People are like, get out of here. It's the shadows. Just look at the shadows, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're not quite out of the cave yet.
It's so crazy to me. Let me see. I know we're kind of coming up on time here. We've spoken a little bit about the dance of science and spirituality, but it does sort of seem like we're beginning to incorporate the spiritual practices that make us whole back into science on some level. I'm sure that you see that a lot in your practice. Can you talk on that a little bit?
Oh, can you ask me a little bit more directly? Like,
yeah, of course. How about this? In your therapeutic practice, how do you choreograph the dance between Western psychology, Eastern philosophies, and indigenous healing methods? What unique insights have you gained from this integration when dealing with mystical experiences?
Yeah. Very complex topic. Many different thoughts running through my head right now. I'm choosing where I want to go. Yeah, I think for me, I'll start by saying like, why is this foundational to me and some of my studies? I studied a holistic counseling psychology program for my master's. It was not just the regular traditional Western psychology. We also had Eastern traditions, indigenous teachings. And so it pulled from lots of different cultures, lots of different times. And for me, that was really important, being able to have this like pulled back perspective on lots of different cultures. And I think because I am a person who has two cultural identities, my father is from Mexico and my mother is from the US, I also grew up on the border between these two countries. So it was very not this world, not that world, like don't really belong in one country or the other. So I always had this kind of zoomed out, pulled back perspective on I don't belong to any one particular culture. I don't see things from just one particular lens or perspective. I like to have many different perspectives. And spirituality and indigenous teachings, Eastern traditions, lots of different religions, lots of different cultural customs, I think create this like zoomed out lens that helps me just in my seat of consciousness. It helps me pull back and hold things in this grander place of acceptance, of not being pigeonholed or seeing through any particular lens. It allows me to flip on these different lenses. Like if you're at the eye doctor and they're showing all these different lenses, right? And it changes like perspective based on whatever lens they're putting in front of you. I can flip through all these different perspectives and see the world in plethora ways. So it first and foremost informs just how I am able to view the world and how I am able to sit with clients and connect, I think, more deeply with people from this zoomed out perspective. So that's how it informs me just in my essence and my being and work with people. Then the actual practices that I can use, it feels like it creates this very eclectic toolbox that I have tools from all different cultures, all different traditions, lots of different things that I can pull. I can quote Plato as easily as I can quote some Native American elders. They can pull all these different like teachings from many different cultures because one culture or one lens is not going to resonate with everybody.
Yeah.
I have clients from all over the place, many different perspectives, many different cultures, just many different worldviews. So being able to pull tools that can reach somebody wherever they're at and meeting people where they are is, to me, one of the best, most attuned ways I can be a therapist. And it's just like studying lots of different modalities as a therapist. Like, I'm not going to expect that EMDR is the right fit for every client who walks in my door. I can't expect that psilocybin is the right medicine for everybody who walks in my door. I can't expect that there's one lens or worldview for everybody who walks in my door. People are going to have many different perspectives, and to be able to appreciate that and pull from this eclectic bag I've got and just find all these different bags of tricks and like, here, how about this one? How about this one? How about this one? That's not good for you. Cool. No big deal. Let's just find something that works for you wherever you're at.
I love it. I can't, in my mind, I can see the optometrist tool with all the different lenses. Like that's such an awesome analogy, and it's just beautiful. Like that should be a logo. Like I could see, I would totally come, you know what I mean? I'd totally be your logo. It's super awesome. Let me see. You know, only recently have I begun to research the idea of neurodiversity, and I speak with so many people. I'm big on the different ideas of neurodiversity. And it seems to me so many people find ourselves in a world where the 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 black and white doesn't make sense. And we're all beginning to understand that we're all a little bit neurodiverse. Like how do you see that becoming more accepted in the future in the next 5, 10, or 15 years? Is it going to be something that, oh yeah, we're all kind of neurodiverse?
That's my personal bend on things. And yeah, I have that on my website as well. And a lot that I pull from like Dr. Nick Walker, who is one of the people who talks a lot about this. And she will talk about how there are often these misconceptions that, yeah, there's this idea of being neurotypical or there's the norm, right? And it's also like the foundation for a lot of pathologies is like
Yeah.
there's a norm and then there are the people who stray from that norm. They're the pathologized ones. They're the broken ones, the ones who need to be diagnosed and treated, and have a whole book of DSM-5 written about them. So how do we deal with these people who are outside of the norm? So yeah, you can tell in the way I'm talking about it, I'm not a fan of this kind of
Right.
way of seeing things. And yeah, I think that we are leaning more into understanding that, well, there's just a lot of, I like the word neurospicy. I don't remember where I heard that, so I can't credit it to whoever, but there's a lot of neurospiciness. Like we just have different
Yeah.
flavors of the way that our neurons are firing and wiring in our brains. It's just different. And there's no one norm. And it's not that we're different from a norm. It's we're all different, period. We're just different. We're all unique snowflakes, and our brains function in different ways. And maybe some people struggle with certain things, some people excel at certain things. Doesn't mean anybody's more or less broken than anybody else or more in need of treatment than anybody else. That's not to say that some people don't struggle more with things than other people. So I'm not trying to erase hardship. There are people who have extreme difficulties and have struggle fitting in with society. But I think that there's more a problem between fit in society rather than something being like wrong with your brain. So I don't think it's something wrong with the person. I think it's something wrong with the fit and how they're trying to fit into a society or an environment that is not designed for them. So it's the problem is with the society not fitting to them, not them not fitting into society.
Yeah. I always think of the first 4 letters of culture, and I'm like, that's the problem. Society's sick on so many levels, and the people having problems are just the symptoms of it. But Valerie, this always happens. I feel like our conversation just gets going, and then like an hour shoots by. You have to come back. Like I got like another 20 questions. However, before we end over here, can you please be so kind as to tell people where they can find you, what you got coming up, where they can reach out to you if they want to do a keynote or they want
Yeah.
to have you come talk to them? Where can people find you? What do you got coming up? What are you excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I answer that, I wanted to say the last thing that you just said that made me think of like one of my favorite quotes from Krishnamurti is that the idea of being healthy in a sick society is no measure of health, right? And so if we are in
It's
a
so true.
society that is sick and we're well adjusted to this sick society, that doesn't actually mean that we're healthy.
I love
So
it.
yeah, I love that. Want to leave with that. But yeah, where you can find me. So my website is therapywithvalerie.com. My Instagram handle is therapy_Valerie. We also, like I said, I work with Zendo Project. You can find zendoproject.org. We are a nonprofit. We function off of donations, so always appreciate support being brought to us that way. I'm also a supervisor at the ketamine-assisted psychedelic therapy clinic. It's called Alchemy Therapy, alchemytherapy.com. Also highly recommend them, also function on donations. So yeah, check us out. Zendo Project also has a training coming up for anybody who wants to be more attuned or help with anybody going through a psychedelic experience. You don't have to want to volunteer with us. This is a training that we've adapted from our volunteer training to just be for anybody who wants to develop their skills of attunement, compassion, learn how to be better partners, better parents, better friends, just better supporters of somebody on a psychedelic or just somebody who's going through life. So that's called the Sitting and Integration Training, SIT course. And that is going to be running next time in February on Monday evenings, Pacific time. It's 4 evenings, 2.5 hours each session. I'll be co-teaching that, so I hope to see people there. Otherwise, you can join our newsletter, follow us on Instagram, Zendo Project, and stay up to date with where we're going to be providing services. If you want to come volunteer with us, we're always appreciating people to come support. And we'll let you know on our Instagram and newsletter where we're going to be, different festivals.
I'm so thankful. Valerie, hang on briefly afterwards. To everybody within the sound of my voice, please go down to the show notes. Check out Valerie, see what she's up to. Check out the trainings. I think she's doing incredible work, and she's volunteering and helping and making a huge impact in the community. And everybody I talk to has high praise for her. So go down to the show notes, check her out, reach out to her if you have any questions. And that's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a beautiful day. Aloha.
Thank you so much.